Good morning, all. Last week we had our introductory lecture. In that introductory class, we talked about the importance of history and why Nigerian students must have great knowledge of history. For instance, in the medieval time, history was seen as a memory of the nation. For instance, in Persian Empire, when the king says that the book of record should be opened, the king is not talking about any other thing except history. In Britain, no British student graduates from high college without a great knowledge of history. Talking about the importance of history to the nation, Professor Babs Fafunwa looked at the importance of history and associated it with nation. And he said that the study of history, he likened it to the memory of a nation. Let's look at the slide and see what Professor Babs Fafunwa said. He says here, commenting on the importance of history, Professor Babs Fafunwa declared that history is to a people what memory is to the individual. A people with no knowledge of the past will suffer from collective amnesia, groping blindly into the future without guideposts or precedents to shape their future course. Only a thorough awareness of their heritage allows them to make public decisions as they make their private ones. Having seen the importance of history, we are now going to look at the objectives of today's lecture. And we say that at the end of today's lecture, our students will be able to define history. They will be able to describe the scope and sub-branches of history. They will state and explain the aims and objectives of teaching history. They will also list the sources of historical knowledge. Having seen or looked at the objective, the next thing we are going to consider is the definition of history. We consider the definitions of history by different authorities. We start with the definition of history by Professor Nassim Bey. Professor Nassim Bey looked at history as an umbrella term that relates to past events as well as the memory, discovery, collection, organization, presentation, and interpretation of information about these events. G.R. Elton defines history as the study of human sayings, thoughts, deeds, and sufferings which occurred in the past and have left present deposit. Professor E.H. Kell postulates that history is a continuous process of interaction between the historian and his facts, an unending dialogue between the present and the past. Professor A.I. Akijobi observes that history is an organized critical study of the past activities of human beings as have produced significant effects on subsequent course of events or on other human beings in the course of events. We look at what Thurston Shaw sees history as. He looked at history as the story of the past derived from written record or from reliable oral tradition. Professor Obaru Ikeme defined history as the memory of human group experience, as a collective memory of the past of the nation. History attempts to bring to the fore the salient and significant events that occurred in the past, which could be utilized in building a prosperous national future. From our definitions above, we can submit that history is an attempt to rethink the past. It inquires into the past in terms of what happened, when it happened, and how it happened. Having seen and examined the definitions of history, we are now going to look at the scopes and sub-branches of history. And we said, like any other discipline or field of study, history has its own content areas. The scope of history is vast. It is the story of man in relation to the totality of his behavior. The scope of history means the breadth, comprehensiveness, variety, and extent of learning experiences provided by the study. Here, we are going to look at the sub-branches of history. Remember that there is no discipline studied in the university that does not have branches, sub-branches. For instance, in chemistry, we have professors of analytical chemistry, professors of physical chemistry, and professors of environmental chemistry. In history, we also have sub-branches. We are going to consider the sub-branches of history. Number one is military history. This concerns itself with warfare, strategies, battles, weapons, and the psychology of combat. Number two is political history. Political history deals with the history of the various political entities created by human race throughout their existence and the ways these states define their borders. Number three is history of religion. History of religion refers to the written record of human religious feelings, thoughts, and ideas. The history of religion has been the main theme for both secular and religious historians. Number four is social history. Social history includes history of ordinary people and their strategies and institutions for coping with life. Number five is cultural history. Cultural history combines the approaches of anthropology and history to examine languages, popular cultural traditions, and cultural interpretations of historical experience. Number six is diplomatic history. Diplomatic history focuses on the relationship between nations, primarily regarding diplomacy and causes of war. More recently, diplomatic history looks at the causes of peace and human rights. Number seven is economic history. Economic history is a branch of historiography concerned with the history and development of economic system and how economics changes over time. Number eight is environmental history. Environmental history is the study of human interaction with the natural world over time, emphasizing the active role nature plays in influencing human affairs. This is a new field that emerged in the 80s to look at the history of the environment and the impact of human activities upon it. Number nine is intellectual history. This is the history of ideas which emerged in the mid-20th century with the focus on the intellectuals and their books on the one hand. The other, the study of ideas as disembodied objects with a career of their own. Number 10, we have gender history. Gender history is a sub-branch of history and gender studies which looks at the past from the perspective of gender. It is in many ways an outgrowth of women's history. Number 11 is historiography. It describes the study of how history is written and how historical understanding changes over time. Historiography seeks to justify the approaches used by historians as well as to understand how and why their theories and interpretations differ. Number 12 is urban history. Urban history is a sub-field of history that examines the historical nature of cities and towns and the processes of urbanization. Number 13 is the one we call public history. And public history describes the broad range of activities undertaken by people with some training in the discipline of history who are currently working outside of specialized academic setting. Public history practice has quite deep roots in the areas of historic preservation, archival science, oral history, museum curatorship, and other related fields. And having seen the sub-branches of history, the next subtopic we consider is the aims and objective of teaching history. Before we look at the aims and objective of history, we will consider this quotation by Professor Edmond Bonk. He says that in history, a great volume is unrolled for our instruction, drawing the materials of future wisdom from the past errors and infirmities of mankind. The study of history is very important to the society. It helps a people to know more about themselves by promoting the people's understanding of their past. For instance, Herodotus had beautifully stated the aim and objective of history in his work at the beginning of his book entitled The Histories. Let's look at what Herodotus, a man who is regarded as the father of history. Let us look at the slide and see what Herodotus said. He said, "Here are presented the result of the inquiry carried out by Herodotus of Halicarnassus. The purpose is to prevent the traces of human events from being erased by time, and to preserve the fame of important and remarkable achievements produced by Greeks and non-Greeks. Among the matters covered is, in particular, the cause of the hostilities between Greeks and the non-Greeks." One should have asked himself if Herodotus did not preserve by writing most of the things, most of the civilizations, cultures, wars fought by Greeks and non-Greeks, how will humanity have known what happened in the past? Therefore, the study of history will help us, one, to have knowledge of our past experience. For instance, Marcus Garvey, one of the leaders of the Pan-Africanist movement, asserts that a people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture will be like a tree without roots. Therefore, we must study history to know our past experience. Number two, history promotes nation building and national integration. The teaching and learning of Nigerian history affords students the opportunity of learning the past histories of the ethnic nationalities that later metamorphosed into Nigeria. Point number three, history makes us wise leaders. Any country whose leaders are conversant with both their local and world history will always make good leaders. Point number four, history provides identity. History provides identity. History helps to provide identity to us as Nigerians, and that is one of the reasons why all modern nations encourage its teaching. Point number five, the study of history is essential for good citizenship. A study of history is essential for good citizenship. This is the most common justification for the place of history in our school's curriculum. Point number six, history promotes international cooperation and understanding. We need to learn from the historical experiences of other African nations and the wider world. Point number seven, history equips the student with basic communication skills. Works in history improves basic writing and speaking skills and is directly relevant to many of the analytical requirements in the public and private sector. Point number 8. History trains the mind and prepares a person for a living. History helps create good business people, professionals, and political leaders. Point number 9. History enables us to learn from our ancestors. For instance, people like Pa Herbert Macaulay, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, Dr. Akanebiam, Sir Ahmadu Bello, Sir Tafawa Balewa, Chief H.O. Davis, Chief Ernest Ikoli, Chief Obafemi Awolowo, Chief Ladoke Akintola, Dr. Michael Okpara, and the rest have all contributed important thoughts and teachings during their time as political leaders. They have toiled extensively to garner these ideas for future generations. All these great works by these our great ancestors will be wasted if we do not understand their ideals and appreciate the work done by them. We can also learn those ideals and implement them in our life, thus paving the way for a successful and fruitful life. Having seen the aims and objectives of teaching history, we are now going to look at the sources of history. The sources of history are such areas where historians can collect facts, the sources where historians can collect facts, data, information, and so on for the reconstruction of the past, and are usually and generally divided into two broad groups. They are classified as primary and secondary sources, written or unwritten. We look at the oral sources. Number 1, before we talk about the oral sources, so many students do not really know the meaning of sources of history. We will use this story as an illustration of how and where history drive its sources. For instance, in Michael Okpara University, Omodike, the students have different methods of cooking their food using energy. For instance, some students will like to use hot plate. Some students will like to use gas cooker. Something happened. The transformer of the university in Michael Okpara University collapsed. And the students didn't have some that were using hot plates and electric cooker to cook. They didn't have any other means of cooking. They were all gathered together. They asked them, now that electric energy is no longer available, what do you do? Some students said, I will use firewood to cook. Remember, they were using electric cooker. They were using hot plates. But this time around, because of the collapse of the transformer, some of them are now using other sources of energy to cook. So in history, history has different sources. It derives its information. So number 1 is oral source. And oral source is of 2 categories: present generation oral source and past generation oral source. Present generation means when the narrator, when the informant is giving you, telling you things that happened in his own time, he himself was also a participant. It is called present generation oral source. It is past generation when the informant, the narrator, is telling you events that happened before he was born. Let us assume that he is telling you, my grandfather, my great-grandfather told my grandfather, and my grandfather told my father, and my father told me this thing I am telling you. It is called past generation oral source. The second source of history is the written source. And in Nigerian area, we identify 3 types of written sources. Number one is Nsibidi system of writing. Nsibidi system of writing was highly indigenous. It was the indigenous way of communicating with one another in written form. Nsibidi did not get across to the entire society, partly because it was highly secretive. The people of Ibibio, Edo, Arochukwu, and Nupe had written system, but was only known to some group of people. It did not get widespread. Therefore, a lot of people did not know about the existence of Nsibidi system of writing. The second written source is what we call the Arabic script. The Arabic scholars, geographers, and travelers that came to Nigerian area before the Europeans came recorded most of the activities they had in Nigerian area via the Arabic script. The third one is the Romanic script, which was introduced in the Nigerian area through the coast from the late 15th century. This form of writing did not become important until the 19th century, when European travelers, traders, missionaries, and other agents penetrated the interior or traveled across the Sahara to the Nigerian areas. The point number 3, that is, we are still on the sources of history. Archaeology is another source of history. And we say that archaeology is a discipline that is especially helpful in dealing with buried sites and objects, which once on earth contribute to the study of history. Archaeology is important in the reconstruction of Nigerian history. If not for the study or the contribution of archaeology, we wouldn't have known sites like the Nok culture in Kaduna State, the Igbuku in Anambra State, the Bini culture in Edo State, and the Ife culture in Osun State. It was through the activities of the archaeologists that we discovered that strong civilization occurred in these areas. We can also mention the shortcomings of archaeology to be that experts, archaeologists make contrasting claims on its behalf. Also, the chronology derived from archaeology is often imprecise. The fourth source of history is what we call ethnographic material. And we say that the word ethnography originated from the Greek word ethnos, meaning race or people. It literally means the descriptive study of human societies, derived from the report of explorers, missionaries, traders, and soldiers. Ethnographic materials compiled by colonial anthropologists and administrators during the colonial period could be found in major libraries, research centers, and national archives. Point number 5, we are still talking about the sources history drive its information. The number 5 is linguistics material, and linguistics is concerned with the study of human languages and language change. Linguistic material has been able to tell the communication historians that the people of Nigeria were once one people. God separated about 10,000 years ago, and they have now developed their different languages. For instance, through linguistics evidence, language researchers have discovered that numerous Yoruba words have the same meaning with Igbo words. Example, an illustration is given below. The word ground in English is called Ile in Yoruba. It is called Ala in Igbo. Water is called Omi in Yoruba. it is called Mini in Igbo. Goat in Yoruba is called Ewure. In Igbo, it is called Ewu. Stone in Yoruba is called Okuta. In Igbo, it is called Okute or Okuta. Fever in Yoruba is called Iba. Fever in Igbo is called Iba. Chicken in Yoruba is called Akoko. Chicken in Igbo is called Okoko. King in Yoruba is called Oba. King in Igbo is called Obi. House in Yoruba is called Ile. House in Igbo is called Ulo. Beans in Yoruba is called Ewa. Beans in Igbo is called Awa. In a way, from the perspective of Nigerian history, linguistic material could be regarded as superior to both written and oral sources. It is the only source which can show how each of the indigenous Nigerian culture groups had come to occupy their respective homeland before the dawn of history. That is, before oral traditions and written records became specific about individual persons, settlement, and institution. Next week, we shall consider chapter 2, titled The Land and People of Nigeria. Thank you.